inquiry, whereas the Labour Party perfectly legitimately wants to say, well, hold on, there are quite a lot of questions about you and your past and why you didn't listen to the warnings both before and after the election about Coulson, and why you then didn't act on them. You merely let him walk away at a time of his own choosing. So in a sense, that's the tussle. But the point about his party is a good one, Andrew. They are worried that despite two big efforts to do this, a press conference and then the statement setting up the inquiry, he keeps being sucked back into questions about what he did and why he did what he did with Andy Coulson. And that's the test really today.
Some people, Tessa Job, will be saying we are on the brink of a major Eurozone crisis, which could well throw our banking system into turmoil. And that is why Parliament should not be in summer recess, not because of this hacking scandal which is obsessed with folk in the media village.
Well, it's obviously, I mean, this degree of criminality, the Prime Minister as compromised by the conflict of interest in appointing Andy Coulson is profoundly important. But you're absolutely right that across the Channel, we're seeing European economies in meltdown. We're also seeing the worst recorded famine in Africa. And I think that I think that to some extent, the Select Committee hearings yesterday will call a pause in this, although many people, and Nick no doubt will know better than any of us, say that there is more, and some say still worse to come. So it will still be there in the headlines.
Is there a danger that a combination of the police and News International have hijacked our politics?
Well, I think politicians have something to answer as well, and we keep talking about the problem with the police and the problem with journalists, and it's not all police and it's not all journalists, but there's also a problem with politicians, and that does need to be addressed. And, you know, Tessa can't just have it that we've got to ask questions of the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party. You know, look back at the track record of her party in government, the failure to take action on numerous occasions, even the most recent one in terms of failure to address the level of fines and punishments for people obtaining information illegally.
To be fair, in the earlier part of the programme, as you know, I did ask Tessa Jowell about these matters and Labour's role in all this. I'm trying to look a little bit forward now. And, if we think
and now you have a Prime Minister compromised by the appointment of his Director of
Communications. I thought I was the one that was meant to interrupt people. At least that's what I get criticised for. You can send the emails to Tessa Jowell for interruptions.
And they will.
We've now got a judicial inquiry. And within that, another inquiry within the judicial inquiry, ongoing major police investigation involving 70 people, though I'm sure there'll be other Select Committee hearings. I ask again, is there a danger now at a time of economic crisis, which we'll be heading to, that this whole issue is hijacking our politics?
I don't think it's going to last very much longer. I think the public appetite for this will fade away. I think politicians will go away on our summer break. We'll then be hit by the real European funding crisis and, as Tessa rightly says, the famine in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. Those issues will tend to dominate, and then we can get back to getting on with those inquiries, and then no doubt other stuff will emerge and it will resurface as a story somewhere or other. I mean, interesting question that I still don't know the answer to. When we heard in the evidence yesterday that Rebecca Wade, now Rebecca Brooks, was away on holiday at the time of signing off the Millie Dowler story, question, who actually signed it off? I still want to know the answer to that. So that'll emerge at some point.
I want to come to Philip Hammond in a minute, but are you as confident that this story's going to disappear? I have a feeling I'm going to be turning on my TV set through the summer and something else will come up.
That's my instinct as well. I mean, I think today there are a lot of voices asking the question you're asking, Andrew, which is, shouldn't we focus on the euro crisis? And I think there are, in news organisations, those debates going on. However, remember cash for honours, for example. Tessa Jowell will remember it vividly. The difficulty for politicians in Downing Street, Tony Blair had it, David Cameron's got it now, they're not in control of the flow of information. The flow of information is coming sometimes from the police, sometimes from News International, sometimes from the lawyers for the victims. There are many more alleged victims in this case than there were in cash for honours. Just this morning, for example, there's a court case in which the judge has ordered the Metropolitan Police to release information about the alleged hacking of Jemima Khan and Hugh Grant. That's another front page story that the Prime Minister can't deal with. So they will, of course, try to get back. I know the Prime Minister's keen to talk about the economy later this week, for example, ahead of potentially bad economic figures next week. But they'll find it difficult because there'll constantly be these questions. There may be future arrests, there may be court cases, then there's a public inquiry. We have former Prime Ministers in the dock on oath, and so on and so on.
Okay.
But what about public appetite? Is that going to still continue? It will be interesting for us, but the polls haven't showed a huge continuing public appetite, have they?
No, they don't appear to have done. So, news organisations respond to the public like politicians.
I'm
if
told,
people
by
are
the
bored,
way, as we're speaking, the Speaker is
it'll move on.
making a statement about pie chucking.
Ah.
Which was, it wasn't a pie, but that's why he's making a
foam pie.
chucking. But I'm not sure I'm not been told if we can go to that yet or not. So we can't. Well, why don't we go and see what the Speaker's policy on foam and pies
And
is?
security.
The lessons to be learned. This investigation will be entirely independent of the House authorities. Statement, the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement. Over the past 2 weeks, a torrent of revelations and allegations has engulfed some of this country's most important institutions. It has shaken people's trust in the media and the legality of what they do, in the police and their ability to investigate media malpractice, and yes, in politics and in politicians' ability to get to grips with these issues. People desperately want us to put a stop to the illegal practices, to ensure the independence and effectiveness of the police, and to establish a more healthy relationship between politicians and media owners. Above all, they want us to act on behalf of the victims, people who have suffered dreadfully, including through murder and terrorism, and who have had to relive that agony all over again because of phone hacking. The public want us to work together to sort this problem out, because until we do so, it will not be possible to get back to the issues they care about even more: getting our economy moving, creating jobs, helping with the cost of living, protecting us from terrorism, and restoring fairness to our welfare and immigration systems. So let me set out the action that we have taken. We now have a well-led police investigation which would examine criminal behaviour by the media and corruption in the police. We have set up a wide-ranging and independent judicial inquiry under Lord Justice Leveson to establish what went wrong, why, and what we need to do to ensure it never happens again. I'm the first Prime Minister to publish meetings with media editors, proprietors, senior executives, to bring complete transparency to the relationship between government ministers and the media, stretching right back to the general election. And the House of Commons, by speaking so clearly about its revulsion at the phone hacking allegations, helped to cause the end of the News Corps bid for the rest of B-Sky B. Today, I would like to update the House on the action that we are taking. First, on the makeup and remit of the public inquiry. Second, on issues concerning the police service. And third, I will answer, I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, at some length, all of the key questions that have been raised about my role and that of my staff. So first, the judicial inquiry and the panel of experts who will assist it. Those experts will be the Civil Liberties Campaigner and Director of Liberty, Shami Chakrabarti, the former Chief Constable of the West Midlands, Sir Paul Scott Lee, the former Chairman of Ofcom, Lord David Curry, the long-serving former political editor of Channel 4 News, Eleanor Goodman, the former political editor of the Daily Telegraph and former special correspondent of the Press Association, George Jones, and the former chairman of the Financial Times, Sir David Bell. These people have been chosen not only for their expertise in the media, broadcasting, regulation and policing, but for their complete independence from the interested parties. Mr. Speaker, I also said last week that the inquiry will proceed in two parts, and I set out a draft terms of reference. We've consulted with Lord Justice Leveson, with the opposition, with chairs of relevant select committees and the devolved administrations. I also talked to the family of Millie Dowler and the Hacked Off campaign. we have made some significant amendments to the remit of the inquiry. With allegations that the problem of the relationship between the press and the police goes wider than just the Met, we have agreed that other relevant forces will now be within the scope of the inquiry. We have agreed that the inquiry should consider not just the relationship between the press, police and politicians, but their individual conduct too. And we've also made clear that the inquiry should look not just at the press, but other media organisations, including broadcasters and social media, if there is any evidence that they've been involved in criminal activities. I'm today placing in the library of the House the final terms of reference. Lord Justice Leveson and the panel will get to work immediately. He will aim to make a report on the first part of the inquiry within 12 months. Mr. Speaker, there should be no doubt. This public inquiry is as robust as possible, it is fully independent, and Lord Justice Leveson will be able to summon witnesses under oath. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the extraordinary events we have seen over the past few days at Britain's largest police force, the Met. On Sunday, Sir Paul Stephenson resigned as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. I want to thank him for the work he's carried out in policing over many, many years in London and elsewhere. On Monday, Assistant Commissioner John Yates also resigned. And again, I want to express my gratitude for the work he has done, especially in improving our response to terrorism. Given the sudden departure of two such senior officers, the first concern must be to ensure the effective policing of our capital and confidence in that policing is maintained. I've asked the Home Secretary and Mayor of London to ensure that the responsibilities of the Met will continue seamlessly. The current Deputy Commissioner, Tim Godwin, who stood in for Paul Stephenson when he was ill and did a good job, will shortly do so again. The vital counter-terrorism job, carried out by John Yates, will be taken on by the highly experienced Cressida Dick. The responsibilities of the Deputy Commissioner, which the House will remember includes general oversight of the vital investigations both into hacking and into the police, operations Weeting and Elvedon, will not be done by someone from inside the Met, but instead by Bernard Hogan Howe, who will join temporarily from Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. We are also looking to speed up the process for selecting and appointing the next Commissioner. But, Mr. Speaker, we cannot hope that a change in personnel at the top of the Met is enough. The simple fact is that the whole affair raises huge issues about the ethics and practices of our police. Let me state plainly, the vast majority of our police officers are beyond reproach and serve the public with distinction. But police corruption must be rooted out. Operation Elvedon and Lord Justice Leveson's inquiry are charged with doing just that. But I believe we can and must do more. Put simply, there are two problems. First, a perception that when problems arise, it is still the police investigating the police. And second, a lack of transparency in terms of police contacts with the media. We are acting on both. These were precisely the 2 points that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, addressed in her statement to this House on Monday. We believe this crisis calls for us to stand back and take another broader look at the whole culture of policing in this country, including the way it is led. At the moment, the police system is too closed. There is only one point of entry into the force. There are too few, and arguably too similar, candidates for the top jobs. As everyone knows, Tom Windsor is looking into police careers, and I want to see radical proposals for how we can open up our police force and bring in fresh leadership. The government is introducing elected police and crime commissioners, ensuring there's an individual holding their local force to account for the local people. And we need to see if we can extend that openness to the operational side too. Why should all police officers have to start at the same level? Why shouldn't someone with a different skill set be able to join the police force in a senior role? Why shouldn't someone who's been a proven success overseas be able to help us turn around a force here at home? I believe these are questions we should ask to get the greater transparency and the stronger corporate governance that we need in Britain's policing. Finally, let me turn to the specific questions that I've been asked in recent days. First, it has been suggested that my Chief of Staff was behaving wrongly when he didn't take up then Assistant Commissioner Yates' offer to be briefed on police investigations around phone hacking. I've said repeatedly about the police investigation that they should pursue the evidence wherever it leads and arrest exactly who they wish. And that is exactly what they have done. Number 10 has now published the full email exchange between my Chief of Staff and John Yates, and it shows my staff behaved entirely properly. Ed Llewellyn's reply to the police made clear that it would not be appropriate to give me or my staff any privileged briefing. The reply that he sent was cleared in advance by my permanent secretary, Jeremy Hayward. Just imagine, Mr. Speaker, if they had done the opposite. If they had asked for or acquiesced in receiving privileged information, even if there was no intention to use it, there would have been quite justified outrage. To risk any perception that Number 10 was seeking to influence a sensitive police investigation in any way would have been completely wrong. Mr. Yates and Sir Paul both backed this judgment in their evidence yesterday. Indeed, as John Yates said, and I quote, "The offer was properly and understandably rejected." The Cabinet Secretary and the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee have both now backed that judgment too. Next, there is the question as to whether the ministerial code was broken in relation to the B-Sky-B merger and meetings with News International executives. The Cabinet Secretary has ruled very clearly that the code was not broken, not least because I had asked to be entirely excluded from the decision. Next, I would like to set the record straight on another question that arose yesterday, whether the Conservative Party had also employed Neil Wallis. The Conservative Party chairman has ensured that all the accounts have been gone through and has confirmed to me that neither Neil Wallis nor his company has ever been employed by or contracted by the Conservative Party, nor has the Conservative Party made payments to either of them. It has been drawn to our attention that he may have provided Andy Coulson with some informal advice on a voluntary basis before the election. To the best of my knowledge, I did not know anything about this until Sunday night. But as with revealing this information, we will be entirely transparent about this issue. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there is the question whether everyone, the media, the police, politicians, is taking responsibility in an appropriate manner. I want to address my own responsibilities very directly, and that brings me to my decision to employ Andy Coulson. I have said very clearly that if it turns out Andy Coulson knew about the hacking at the News of the World, he will not only have lied to me, but he would have lied to the police, to a select committee, to the Press Complaints Commission, and of course perjured himself in a court of law. More to the point, if that comes to pass, he could also expect to face severe criminal charges. I have an old-fashioned view about innocent until proven guilty. But if it turns out I've been lied to, that would be a moment for a profound apology. And in that event, I can tell you I will not fall short. My responsibilities are for hiring him and for the work he did in Downing Street. On the work he did, I will repeat, perhaps not for the last time, that his work at Downing Street has not been the subject of any serious complaint. And of course he left months ago. On the decision to hire him, I believe I have answered every question about this. It was my decision. Hold on. It was my decision. I take responsibility. People will, of course...
I apologise for interrupting the Prime Minister. The House must come to order and hear in silence the remainder of the statement. The Prime Minister.
People will, of course, make judgments about it. Of course, I regret, and I am extremely sorry about the furore it has caused. With 20/20 hindsight and all that has followed, I would not have offered him the job, and I expect that he wouldn't have taken it. But you don't make decisions in hindsight, you make them in the present. You live and you learn, and believe you me, I have learnt. Now, I look forward to answering any and all questions about these issues, and following this statement, I will open the debate. But the greatest responsibility I have is to clear up this mess, so let me finish by saying this. There are accusations of criminal behaviour by parts of the press and potentially the police where the most rapid and decisive action is required. There are issues of excessive closeness to media groups and media owners where both Labour and Conservative have to make a fresh start. There is the history of missed warnings, select committee reports, information commissioner reports, missed by the last government, but yes, missed by the official opposition too. What the public expects is not petty political point scoring, but what they want, what they deserve, is concerted action to rise to the level of events and pledge to work together to sort this issue out once and for all. And it is in that spirit that I commend this statement to the House.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
That was a big mistake. Should have asked it. Can I start by thanking the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, for his statement. Recalling Parliament was the right thing to do, because rebuilding trust in the press, police and politics is essential for our society. The most powerful institutions in the land must show the responsibility we expect from everybody else. That is why the country wants answers from those involved in the crisis, so that those responsible can be held to account, and so we as a country can move forward to address all the issues that the Prime Minister mentioned in his statement. That is why I welcome Lord Levison's inquiry and the announcement of the terms of reference, and indeed the panel members chosen by the Prime Minister for that purpose. It's why I welcome the Prime Minister's agreement with us about the Press Complaints Commission and its abolition, and that it needs to be replaced. It's why I welcome the apology from Rupert Murdoch and the withdrawal of the B-Sky B bid. And it's why we respect the decision of Sir Paul Stephenson to stand down, so that going forward, the leadership of the Met can focus on the vital work that is necessary. So we are beginning to see answers given and responsibility taken, and that is right. But the Prime Minister knows that he must do the same if the country is to move forward. The Prime Minister, I have a number of questions for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said in his statement...
I said a few moments ago that the remainder of the Prime Minister's statement should be heard in silence. Order! I say the same to members who are now heckling. Think of what the public thinks of our behaviour. Order! And stop it without delay. Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, let me start with B-Sky B. The Prime Minister said in his statement something that he said on a number of occasions, which is that he was excluded from the formal decision-making process. But with respect, that doesn't quite answer the questions he's been asked. Last Friday, he revealed that since taking office, he had met representatives of News International or News Corps, including Rebecca Brooks and James Murdoch, on 26 separate occasions. So the first question I have for the Prime Minister is whether he can assure the House that the B-Sky B bid was not raised in any of those meetings or in phone calls with those organisations, and whether he can also say whether at any time he discussed the bid with the Culture Secretary, or indeed any of his officials discussed the bid with the officials of the Culture Secretary. Let me now turn to Andy Coulson. 10 days ago, the Prime Minister said about his decision to employ Andy Coulson, "I wasn't given any specific information that would lead me to change my mind." Mr. Speaker, the country has the right to expect that the Prime Minister would have made every effort to uncover the information about Mr. Coulson to protect himself and his office. Yet the pattern of events suggests the opposite, that the Prime Minister and those around him made every effort not to hear the facts about Mr. Coulson. In the last week, we have become aware of 5 opportunities for the Prime Minister or his staff to have acted on specific information that would surely have led him to change his mind about Mr. Coulson. All were declined. His Chief of Staff, Ed Llewellyn, was told in February 2010 that Mr. Coulson had hired a convicted criminal to work at the News of the World who was accused of making payments to police on behalf of the newspaper. Even Rebecca Brooks said yesterday this decision was extraordinary. Yet the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff apparently did nothing with the information. In May 2010, the Deputy Prime Minister warned the Prime Minister about bringing Mr. Coulson into Downing Street. He did nothing. On September the 1st, 2010, the New York Times published an investigation quoting multiple sources saying Mr. Coulson knew about hacking which was rife at the News of the World. We now know from John Yates that article was enough to lead the police to reopen their inquiries, and indeed it led to Operation Wheating. We also know now it triggered the termination of the Metropolitan Police's contract with Neil Wallace, Mr. Coulson's former deputy at the News of the World. And it led to the offer by Mr. Yates to Ed Llewellyn for the Prime Minister to be briefed. Now, the Cabinet Secretary has said it is right that the offer was not taken up. But the question is why? Because it would be seen, because the Prime Minister was compromised by his relationship with Mr. Coulson and therefore could not be told anything at all about an investigation concerning a member of his own staff. He was hamstrung by a conflict of interest. But Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister shouldn't have had to rely on briefings from his Chief of Staff. Here was a major investigation published by a leading global newspaper about the Prime Minister's Director of Communication. Mr. Speaker, the Met fired Mr. Wallace, even though he wasn't mentioned in the article, because of the associations he had with Mr. Coulson and the publication of the article. And what did the Prime Minister do? He did nothing. Mr. Speaker, given the New York Times evidence, the public will rightly have expected very loud alarm bells to ring in the Prime Minister's mind, yet apparently he did nothing. And then in October, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff was approached again by The Guardian about the serious evidence they had about Mr. Coulson's behaviour. Once more, nothing was done. Mr. Speaker, this can't be put down to gross incompetence. It was a deliberate attempt to hide from the facts about Mr. Coulson.
Order. Members shouting out shouldn't be doing so. They must calm themselves, keep on an even keel. It's better for their health and for the House. Mr. Ed Miliband.
The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, was caught in a tragic conflict of loyalty between the standards and integrity that people should expect of him and his staff and his personal allegiance to Mr. Coulson. He made the wrong choice. He chose to stick with Mr. Coulson. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, my second question is, can he now explain why he failed to act on clear information and why those around him built a wall of silence between the facts and the Prime Minister? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's conflict of interests had real effects. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner resigned on Sunday. The Prime Minister didn't talk about the reasons for his resignation, but the House must talk about it. Sir Paul Stephenson was trapped. He was trapped between a Home Secretary angry at not being told about the hiring of Mr. Coulson's deputy, Neil Wallace, and Sir Paul's belief, in his own words, that doing so would have compromised the Prime Minister. Compromised him because of Mr. Coulson. And why did Sir Paul think that? Because his own deputy, John Yates, had been told by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff that the Prime Minister should be told nothing. So, Mr. Speaker, this catastrophic error of judgment, hiring Andy Coulson, hanging on for him too long, directly contributed to the position Sir Paul found himself in and his decision to resign. So my third question, Mr. Speaker, is does the Prime Minister accept that his conflict of interest put the Metropolitan Police Commissioner in an impossible position? So 3 questions are about B-Sky B, the warnings about Mr. Coulson that were consistently ignored, and about the Met Commissioner. These and many other questions will have to be answered by the Prime Minister over the coming months. But there is one other question which matters now. He says that in hindsight he made a mistake by hiring Mr. Coulson. He says that if Mr. Coulson lied to him, he would apologise. Mr. Speaker, that isn't good enough. Because people, it's not about hindsight, Mr. Speaker. It's not about whether Mr. Coulson lied to him. It is about all the information and warnings that the Prime Minister ignored. He was warned, and he preferred to ignore the warnings so that the country can have the leadership we need. Why doesn't he do more? Why doesn't he do more than give a half apology and provide the full apology now for hiring Mr. Coulson and bringing him into the heart of Downing Street?
Prime Minister.
What I would say to the right honourable gentleman is stop hunting feeble conspiracy theories and start rising to the level of events. Most of that was just a tissue of totally... I will try and answer every point, but it was... First of all, let me thank him for what he said about recalling Parliament. That is right. Let me thank him for what he said about Lord Leveson. I think he will do a good job. Let me thank him for what he said about the panel, which we sent the names to his office this morning. I have to say, on most of the other questions, I feel he wrote the questions before he heard my statement today. He asks about the issue of... He asked about the issue of B-Sky B. The Cabinet Secretary has said there was no breach of the Ministerial Code. You heard the evidence of Rebecca Wade yesterday saying there was not one single inappropriate conversation. And when it comes to setting out meetings with News Corporation, I have set out every single meeting since the last election. No. The right honourable gentleman published a list this morning, but it does not go back to the last election. And indeed, when are we going to see the transparency from Tony Blair and from Gordon Brown? Second issue. The second issue, his questions about Andy Coulson.
Order. The House is getting overexcited again. I'm glad it's now calmed down and will want to listen to what the Prime Minister has to say.
Second, he asked questions about Andy Coulson. Let me just remind him of this point. No one has raised a single question about his conduct at number 10 Downing Street. And let's just make this point. There is only today one party leader with a News International executive with a cloud in his head sitting in his office. Third question. The questions he raises about my Chief of Staff, Edward Llewellyn. Is he honestly saying, when it comes to this issue of the proposed meeting with John Yates, is the leader of the opposition suggesting that he knows better than the chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, than the Cabinet Secretary, than John Yates, than Paul Stevenson, than all these people, including Jeremy Hayward, who, by the way, worked diligently for Tony Blair and Gordon Brown? Is he saying all those people are wrong and he is right? I think that shows a staggering lack of judgment. Let me just answer the question about Sir Paul's resignation. I know it is inconvenient for the right honourable gentleman, but Sir Paul Stevenson set out the reasons for his resignation yesterday in detailed evidence and explained how his situation was so different to the situation in number 10 Downing Street. Most of the questions he asked I had already answered. The role of the Chief of Staff, answered. The parallels with the Metropolitan Police, answered. The role of Mr Wallace, answered. On closeness to media groups, let's be clear about what we heard yesterday. Rupert Murdoch said, and I quote, "The politician I was closest to was Gordon Brown as Chancellor." And let us just remember, who was the advisor when Gordon Brown was the Chancellor?
And we're going to leave the proceedings in the Commons there for a moment. We've heard from the Prime Minister, we've heard the questions from the Leader of the Opposition and the response of the Prime Minister. We're going to keep an eye on things, though, and we'll bring you more of these exchanges between what will now be between backbenchers on both sides of the House and the Prime Minister. But let's try and take stock of where we are at the moment. The Prime Minister announced the composition of the Leveson judicial inquiry into the media, the police and politics. 3 journalists will be part of it. That may raise an eyebrow in some quarters. Too many journalists, some may think, but also the former Ofcom director, a former police chief, police chief, and Shami Chakrabarti, the Liberty director. It's a panel of 6 plus the judge himself. Interestingly, too, that the Prime Minister announced that the inquiry is going to be widened, not just the relationship between police, press and politicians, but their individual contact too. And it looks like broadcasters and social media are going to be included as well, which will make it a very broad inquiry, and perhaps quite a long sitting inquiry too. Before I get the reaction of the panel, let's just get a couple of emails that you've been sending us in, Joe.
Yes, we have had emails to the initial statement from David Cameron. This has come from Bernard McKell-Downey in Worcestershire. C. Cameron, David Cameron, is trying to apportion all the blame onto the police and trying to use this as an excuse to change the way people are recruited into the police. This is not just about alleged police corruption. It's also about corrupt relationships between the media and the politicians. Jason in Watford said David Cameron's excuse that if Coulson lied to him, then he'll be very angry is pathetic. This comes from John in Manchester. Once again, we get politicians pointing the finger at everyone else first and buying time before the summer recess in the hope that by the time they return, it'll all have blown over. And this was a sense of a lot of emails talking about other issues that are important that are being ignored. In the meantime, bankers receive £14 billion in bonuses. This actually comes... no, there's no name on this one. Labour are intent on raising minor issues when the issue of Eurozone crisis looms ever large. And this from David in Bury St Edmunds. People have grown tired of this story. People do not want to see Labour politicians trying to score party political points. It trivialises it.
All right. Philip Hammond, the Prime Minister has come as close as you can get to saying, in retrospect, it was a mistake to hire Andy Coulson.
Well, he's saying if he could have foreseen what would have happened, what has happened, you know, we go back to this wonderful thing, hindsight again, then he wouldn't have offered him the job. And I'm sure he's equally right in saying Andy Coulson wouldn't have wanted to take the job.
So that's what I said. In retrospect, the Prime Minister's now... I mean, many people said at the time it was a mistake. Prime Minister is saying now, in retrospect, it was a mistake.
It was a judgment that he made at the time, and he's been very upfront about saying it was his decision that he takes responsibility for. He sought clear assurances, he was given them, and he said to us this morning that if it turns out that those assurances were lies, then he will owe an apology, which he will deliver.
But it now looks like it was a mistake.
Well, we don't know about the...
Well, but that's what the Prime Minister said, effectively.
But he also...
And he's never gone this far before.
He also said, and this is very important, that he believes in the presumption of innocence until guilt is proven. And I think we have to be very, very careful about judging
I understand that, but I wasn't talking about
hasn't even had a
guilt
chance
or
to answer
innocence
the
on that.
yet.
The Leader of the Opposition documented a number of occasions, a number of events, warnings from Mr Clegg, the New York Times report, Mr Yates himself, Guardian report in October, when evidence was growing that it had been a mistake to hire Mr Coulson, and yet the Prime Minister ignored them. Why?
Well, I mean, the Nick Clegg example. I mean, Nick Clegg has said himself that he didn't bring any evidence or any new information. He simply expressed a view that he was uncomfortable with the decision to hire Andy Coulson. That's fair enough position. But what Ed Miliband's tried to do this morning, instead of, I think, rising to the occasion and expressing a wish to work together to sort this problem out, he's inviting people to look back at issues again with the benefit of hindsight. Tessa's, what will become a famous phrase, the dock of hindsight, reinterpreting things with the benefit of what we now know in a way that is completely inappropriate. And I think from the evidence I've seen that the information or tittle-tattle that was brought to Downing Street to people in Mr Cameron's staff was dealt with appropriately at the time. It was handled properly. It would have been wrong for him to have had a private briefing with John Yates, as Sir Gus O'Donnell, even Keith Vaz have now acknowledged. So it just seems to me that Ed Miliband is clutching at straws in trying to reinterpret all this stuff.
You think the incredible investigative reporting, which all politicians have been very keen to praise recently, while they think of other regulations to shackle the press, you think the incredible investigative reporting of the New York Times in September and the Guardian in October was tittle-tattle.
No, they were pieces of...
Tittle-tattle,
they
you
were
called them.
Some of what was being brought to David
New York
Cameron's staff...
Times report was tittle-tattle.
No, I didn't say that. I said some of what was brought was clearly... No, I didn't say that, Andrew. But look, it's easy from where we sit now, with a much bigger picture of wrongdoing emerging, to put these things in a context, which begs the question, why weren't they acted on? At the time, they were isolated pieces of journalistic work which sat within the context of continued assertion by the police that there was nothing to investigate, that the investigation was completed and closed.
And we now know why the police were saying that.
Of course we do, now, with the benefit of hindsight.
Other reports had suggested we knew it earlier on. Tessa, Giles, the great culmination of Mr. Miliband's questioning, 4 questions there, to the Prime Minister was in the end to demand a full apology for hiring Mr. Coulson. In the grand scheme of things, do you think anybody outside the Westminster Village cares whether he gives a full apology or not?
Well, I'm very alive to this question all the time, whether we're talking to ourselves or whether we're talking to the country. And
I mean, he said it was a mistake, in effect.
Well, I can tell you, I have had more emails about this, about the B-Sky-B bid, than I've had actually since fox hunting 13 years ago. So I think people are concerned about it. I think we could have a much broader discussion about that. But what this comes back to is not that the Prime Minister disregarded sort of tittle-tattle and idle gossip. There were 4, if not 5, serious representations to challenge his judgment about taking Andy Coulson into the heart of government.
I understand that, and you're quite right, and the leader made these points. But in the grand scheme of things, does a full apology really... I mean, everybody, I know Philip Hammond had difficulty saying it, but everybody now from the Prime Minister down is saying, yeah, it was a mistake.
I think
so. To make a... I mean, does it... for people watching today who may be worried about their jobs, about prices rising, about living standards, whether or not it's a full apology, does it matter?
There has to be a moment of absolutely unqualified apology from which the inquiry can then take over and things move on. I absolutely accept all the strictures about people being innocent until they're proven guilty.
But Tessa, well, we're not even talking about that. We're simply talking about whether he was the right man for the job. Whether he's guilty of a criminality is a different issue. But let me ask you this. Who among us in positions of responsibility has not made a wrong appointment?
Oh, I think we all have. But this is... Oh, exactly. And if you make a wrong appointment, you kind of own up to the fact that you made the wrong appointment.
Prime Minister's been very clear.
For whatever reason.
Responsibility for the appointment of Andy Coulson.
You had warnings that could not have been clearer and have subsequently been vindicated
Tessa,
not to take Andy Coulson into the heart of government.
And he made a mistake.
And we see...
who among us has not made a mistake like that?
But I think, Andrew, it's a question of the scale of the mistake. And what we now see is the Prime Minister constrained by the conflict of interest that Andy Coulson
One of the
created.
viewers suggested we should make a deal that when Gordon Brown apologises for selling the gold reserves when they were about $300 an ounce, and it's now $1,600, then Mr. Cameron can apologise for Mr. Coulson. That would be quite a good deal, don't you think?
Well, I think
or even for the closeness of his relationship with Maddox.
There is not a politician at a senior level who won't have done things for which they should apologise. But let's not lose the focus on this specific issue in relation to the Prime Minister's judgment.
I'm going to come to Don Foster, then I'll get Nick Robinson to sum everything up. Do you believe it important that the Prime Minister issues the full apology?
No, I mean, I honestly don't understand why we're so obsessed with this particular issue. You know, I mean, the Prime Minister was given advice by Nick Clegg and others that this was not an advisable appointment. Why did they give that advice? Not because they knew of any criminal wrongdoing or that he wasn't suitable to do the job. It was about the impression that it would create. And that was solely it. And so far, if he's still innocent until proven guilty, what we now see is it made an even worse impression than some of us might have expected. Therefore, clearly, it was, in that sense, an error of judgment. But it is not a hanging offence. It is not the crucial issue. We've just heard, I thought, a very powerful statement from the Prime Minister, giving us details of the inquiry, extending and detailing the remit of that inquiry, and I hope we'll come back to that because I think the extension to broadcasting is a huge mistake, and telling us what more is going to be done about the real concerns of the British people, which is corruption in the police and concerns about illegal activity by the press, and we should concentrate on that.
Nick Robinson, I think clearly, given our previous discussion before we went to the statement, with an eye on the back of his head to his own back benches, the Prime Minister wanted to appear decisive and in control and in command of all the issues.
And there's another crucial thing he wanted to appear. He wanted to appear like he got it about Andy Coulson. He was being brought down every time he tried to talk about the inquiry or the police or the press or even politicians' behaviour in general. He was being dragged back to that decision about Andy Coulson. So taking what will have been a pretty big step for him to take about someone he still describes as a friend and admits that he met at Chequers after his resignation, he has done it for political reasons. He has said, with 20/20 hindsight, he wished he had not appointed Mr. Coulson. You live and you learn was the memorable phrase. Yeah. Believe me, I've learned. Now, that is an appeal to the public to say, hey, guys, we all made mistakes. Yeah, I've made one.
And also, because now we do have, as he says, people will, of course, make judgments about it. And, of course, I regret and I am extremely sorry for the furore it has caused. So it is as close as anything to saying he regrets it and he is sorry.
What Ed Miliband surely is doing is this. One is, frankly, making an investment for the future for the reasons we said. This is not the end of the matter. Mr. Coulson will or will not be charged, will or will not face court action. Others, too. There will be an inquiry. Ed Miliband is trying to lodge in the public's mind that there was what he regards as a catastrophic error of judgment. And he's obviously also trying to do something else, which is to say that this is the sort of Prime Minister who is deaf to criticism, that when people say to him, you're making a mistake, he doesn't listen. I would be very surprised, Andrew, if that same theme is not pursued next week when economic figures come out suggesting that growth is not that great in this country. And once again, he will say that Mr. Cameron's the sort of man who doesn't listen to the warnings that he was given. So I think this is an investment by the Labour Party in a theme about the Prime Minister, but it is a reflection of this, Andrew, that politically, I felt this story currently isn't going very far. That really there was not much debate about the inquiry or the police. And if we look back in 10 years, there's one thing that we haven't discussed at all, which I think may turn out to be the most significant of all. The Prime Minister signalled he wants to smash the way the police force is currently run. It's very, very striking. He wants to bring in chief officers from abroad. He wants to bring in officers directly rather than having them recruited from the ground and having to come up. In other words, he thinks the culture of the police force in Britain is wrong and needs, and I use the word not lightly, to be smashed.
And he's even bringing in the two Met investigations currently going on, one into the hacking scandal, the other into corruption of the police. He's bringing in a former head of Liverpool, Merseyside policeman, to be the person that they will report to, and not to a policeman in the Met, which itself is quite... I mean, the implication of that is, I'm not sure I can trust the Met.
This is Bernard Hogan-Howe that's been brought in to do that.
Tessa, what do you make of the composition of this committee, of the judicial inquiry?
Well, I think it is. I think it's a very distinguished inquiry. I mean, obviously, all of us know a number of the members of it. Are there too many journalists?
The three out of the six, Eleanor Goodman, obviously Channel 4 political editor formerly. George Jones, former Daily Telegraph political editor, was a journalist of mine at the Sunday Times. David Bell, former Financial Times.
I mean, they're all regarded.
David Bell had been a Financial Times journalist.
I think, by right across the spectrum, as journalists of great distinction and independence, who believe in the highest values in journalism and
So you don't think the public will think, hey, we've already criticised the PCC for being journalists investigating journalists, that there are too many?
Well, I think I think the hearings will sit in public, won't they? I think I think you've always got to think about how the public are engaged on a continuing basis, rather than an inquiry like this disappearing into a room in Whitehall behind closed doors. But that, of course, also depends on the public's continuing appetite.
But they will be calling the Murdochs again.
Yeah. Yes.
They will.
That will happen
absolutely.
again, and they'll be
Absolutely.
calling lots of it. They may even call Nick Robinson.
Who knows? I mean, I think there'll probably be a different criticism made, and I know, unlike both Eleanor Goodman and George Jones, worked with them for many years, is they're political journalists.
Yes.
And I think the people who produce tabloid newspapers, who say it's a very competitive market, they are fighting to retain these as successful businesses, will say that people like me and people like them don't get the things you have to do in order to get tabloid stories. Now, I'm not talking about criminality, of course.
No.
But they
Just
will
the
say,
culture.
you live in a sort of closed world of chatting to your friends who are politicians and context. And I think, I wouldn't be surprised if Paul Dacre, who runs the Daily Mail, will look at that composition and say, who gets what it takes to produce a paper like mine?
but
Now, let me ask you this, Don Foster, this broadening of the remit for broadcasters and social media, which I mean, broadcasters you kind of understand. We're in the frame
I
too.
don't.
Social media seems to me to be as long as a piece of string.
I mean, what happened, as I understand it, is that somebody had the bright idea of extending the remit, produced an early day motion and thrust it in under the noses of select committee chairs who signed it. And I've talked to a couple who say, well, I'm not really sure why I did that. And I think it's a big, big mistake, because the broadcasting regulation is very different from the press regulation. I think it's much tougher already. There are no real concerns about it. There are issues to do with who owns the media. We need to sort that out. And once you get into social media, I mean, we're going to be bogged down for years. But the great thing about having so many journalists, if I can just comment on that earlier point, is all three of those are brilliantly good at asking tough questions. And that's what I think above all. It's not just their experience within the media, but their ability to ask the right questions and get on with it quickly.
Final thought from me.
Just only, I think the reason I suspect that broadcasting is included is that the distinction between broadcast and print is becoming less and less meaningful. Andrew's got his iPad there, Joe's got her laptop. You might have a website from The Sun and a website from the BBC. You might have video stream from News International and video stream from the BBC. There are long-term questions about the regulation of our business that say it's quite hard to make the distinction that is currently made.
So if it's going to go into that, the inquiry could
Well,
be
if-
2020.
Though it's a bit,
Well, we won't have any newspapers left by then.
yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing that strikes me is a vast,
Huge
vast
job.
topic.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Don't viewers leave the programme, but we're going to say goodbye to our panel this morning. We thank you for being with us in another interesting morning in the Palace of Varieties.
And actually, just one extra thing that was announced just before the statements. A parliamentary investigation has been launched into the attempt by a man to attack Rupert Murdoch with shaving foam during his appearance before a Commons committee yesterday. He'll also obviously appear before a magistrate's court, but they're going to have a parliamentary investigation too. I think that's probably what John Burker was talking about, the Speaker. Now, of course, we've been keeping an eye on proceedings in the Commons, and we'll pick up on David Cameron's response to Ed Miliband, where he was criticising Labour's close relationship with News International.
And let us just remember, Mr. Speaker, who was the advisor to Gordon Brown when he was the Chancellor, the right honourable gentleman. On the issue of the action we have taken, let us remember during the last Parliament, reports of the Information Commissioner ignored, reports of the Select Committee ignored, the failure of the police investigation ignored. We now know exactly which party was, if you like, the slumber party, and it was the party opposite. But frankly, Mr. Speaker, everyone can see exactly what he is doing, an attempt to play this for narrow party advantage. The problem has been taking place over many years. The problem is for both our main parties, and the problem is one that the public expect us to stop playing with, but to rise to the occasion and deal with it for the good of the country.
Order. Mr. David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, under the previous Labour government, when my right honourable friend, the member for Ashford, Damien Green, was arrested by the Metropolitan Police, the Prime Minister and Home Secretary of the day were not notified of the details of that investigation. At the time, the Labour front bench insisted it was a matter of ministerial propriety that they were not told. Is it not therefore the case that not only has Mr Ed Llewellyn not done wrong, he's done exactly what a public servant should do, and to say otherwise is hypocrisy?
My right honourable friend makes a very good point. I think when you read the exchange of emails and you see what Edward Llewellyn said, you see that it was cleared in advance by Jeremy Hayward. It was absolutely right. We don't live in a country, thank God, where the Prime Minister starts ordering who should be arrested and who shouldn't be.
Mr. Alan Johnson.
The Home Secretary made a statement on Monday of over 1,000 words, but the two words Neil and Wallace weren't mentioned. She, like me, was unaware of his appointment. But we weren't in a situation where Neil Wallace's best buddy was working for us. The Prime Minister was. Did he know that Neil Wallace was giving advice to the Metropolitan Police?
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that, and as I've said, in relation to the work he did for Andy Coulson, I was unaware of that. And I think this is an important point, because one of the issues is, frankly, the transparency and information that there was about Neil Wallace and the Metropolitan Police. The one thing everyone has to say about number 10 Downing Street, there was no hiding the fact that we had employed Andy Coulson.
Mr. Simon Hughes.
Mr. Speaker, I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Sir Paul Stephenson and thank him for the announcements that he has made. But will he now explicitly say that he accepts that all governments, from this one back for over 20 years, have been far too close to the media giants in this country, that has to end, which means no more backdoor visits to number 10, and that we should be able to have not just sight of party political papers, but if necessary cabinet papers, and the recommendations of the Information Commissioner and others should be implemented to increase criminal penalties for illegality immediately.
Well, first of all, I accept the point he makes about transparency, and what I've set out is not just meetings, if you like, that are business meetings, official meetings with media executives and proprietors, but also private meetings as well. And in relation to the meeting I held with Rupert Murdoch, the fact is not whether he came in through the back door or the front door, but was it declared in the proper way? And yes, it was. In the old days, the only way you found out whether someone had met Rupert Murdoch was waiting for Alistair Campbell's diaries. So in our case, we have been very transparent about this. It goes all the way back to the election. It includes both private and official meetings. It includes meetings whether they were at Chequers or number 10 Downing Street. And I think we need to go further in this regard. And I think this should be the new standard. And I say to the right honourable gentleman who's published the information up to when he became leader of the Labour Party, why can't we see right back to the general election?
Mr. Jack Straw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister read of the extensive investigation in the New York Times on the 1st of September of last year, what was his reaction to that, and what did he do?
The question I ask myself all the way through is there new information that Andy Coulson knew about hacking at the News of the World? I couldn't be clearer about this. If it turns out that he knew about that hacking, he will have lied to a select committee, he will have lied to the police, he will have lied to a court of law, and he will have lied to me. Now, I made the decision to employ him in good faith because of the assurances he gave me. There was no information in that article that would lead me to change my mind about those assurances. But if it turns out, as I said, I couldn't be clearer, if it turns out that he knew about the hacking, then that will be a matter of huge regret, a matter of great apology, a disgrace not only that he worked in government, but also, vitally, something that would be subject to criminal prosecutions.
Mr. John Whittingdale.
Does my right friend agree that what people really care about is the appalling revelations of what has been going on in the newsroom of the News of the World and in parts of the Metropolitan Police, and that the public anger about that is expressly felt by thousands of hard-working and honest journalists and thousands of dedicated and courageous police officers. And for that reason, it is essential that the police investigation should be completed as quickly as possible, that IPC's investigation should be completed, and the judicial inquiry should get underway and completed as quickly as possible. And can he give an absolute assurance that those will now be given the priority that they should have been given a long time ago?
My honourable friend is entirely right. At the absolute heart of this, we have got to keep the victims of the hacking scandal. And those are people who've suffered appallingly already and were made to suffer all over again. And the key thing is here is the extent and scale of the judicial inquiry. An inquiry like this into the media, into malpractice, into the police, and yes, into politicians too, has not been held for many, many years. It's been talked about and debated. It's now going to be underway, and I wanted to get on with its work as rapidly as possible.
Tom Watson.
Mr. Speaker, I must challenge the Prime Minister on the accuracy of one of his assertions. He said that nobody raised Andy Coulson's conduct with him whilst he worked for the Prime Minister. I did, in a letter on the 4th of October last year, after new allegations that he'd listened to tapes of intercepted voicemail messages came through, and I said in the letter that this cast doubt on the accuracy of Mr. Coulson's statement. I'm still waiting for a reply.
The point, I think, and let me pay tribute to the honourable gentleman and what he has done in his role in this. But the point I'm making, is simply this: that the time that Andy Coulson spent at number 10 Downing Street, the work he did for the government, no one has made a complaint against, and that does seem to me to be important, because what I've said is I gave him a second chance after he had resigned from the News of the World because of what happened under his watch. And no one has raised with me any of his conduct at number 10 while he carried out that job.
Mr. Charlie Elphick.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said that contacts with the media will be published since the general election. I have to say, I don't think that's good enough. What we need to know is the contacts that the government has had for the last 10 years with the media. We need an investigation into the Home Office and what Home Office ministers were doing.
Well, the point I make to the honourable gentleman is this inquiry is specifically looking at the relationship between politicians and the media, and indeed, at the request of Hacktoff and the Dowler family, the conduct of both. Now, that inquiry can go as far back as it wants to go back to examine the relationship between politicians and the media. But frankly, I think we all need to be clear, particularly the two main parties, that the level of contact has been very great, that we did spend too much time, frankly, trying to get on with media companies to get our message across. And as a result, we put on the back burner too often, the last government, the last opposition, we put on the back burner too often the issues of how to regulate the media. That's the mistake that we made. We've both all got to be honest about it. And it's not just, by the way, the relationship with News International. It's also about the work we do trying to win over the BBC or the Independent or the Guardian. Let's be frank about this. Let's be transparent about the meetings we had, and then we can learn the lessons and use this as a cathartic moment to sort out the relationship and put it on a better footing.
Mr. Keith Vaz.
I'm not sure if the Prime Minister was awake at 5 o'clock this morning, but I'm glad to hear it. But the Home Affairs Select Committee published a unanimous report which pointed out to the fact that we believe there were serious misjudgments in the police investigation, as well as that News International had deliberately thwarted the police investigation. He wouldn't have had a chance to read the evidence of Lord MacDonald of River Gladen, who said he took 5 minutes to look at a file to realise there was criminality. The file was with Harbottle and Lewis for 4 years. Would he send a message out from the dispatch box that anyone who has information about this matter should hand it over immediately to Sue Akers and explain why it's been withheld?
Well, I will certainly send out that message from this dispatch box, at the same time as thanking the right honourable gentleman for the work that his committee has done. I haven't been able to study all of the evidence yesterday. I did look at the key conclusions of his report this morning, and I think the work that his committee is doing, that is drilling down into the conduct of News International and indeed of the police, is extremely valuable. But now what we've got to let happen is the police investigation, now properly resourced, to get underway, to get to the truth, and to make sure there are prosecutions as appropriate, and then to let the inquiry get underway to do its work as well. But I think the right honourable gentleman has played a very good role in helping to make that happen.
Andrea Leadsom.
Does the Prime Minister share my concern that at a time when this House is involved in a very important discussion about this awful issue of phone hacking, and at a time when most people in the country are most concerned about what's going on in the Eurozone area and the impact that that might have on their jobs and their employment in this country, that the Leader of the Opposition is so narrowly focused?
The point I would make, I think, to all honourable members is the public want us to sort this out, and one of the reasons they want us to sort it out, and they want us to do it on a cross-party basis, is they want us to get on to the other issues that they care so deeply about. And everyone's got to recognise the threat and the problems that we face as there are difficulties in the Eurozone, difficulties that will affect us right here in the UK. But I fully understand and recognise we've got to deal with this before we can get on to those issues.
Mr. Ben Bradshaw. In his conversations with the Murdochs, with Mrs. Brooks and other News Corp people, was there ever any mention of the B-Sky B bid?
As Rebecca Brooks said yesterday in Parliament, there was never a conversation that could have been held in front of the Select Committee. He asked me to answer the question. Perhaps he will now be transparent, as he was Culture Secretary, about all of the contacts he has had with News International over many years. I have set out the clearest possible position. It is for others now to do the same thing.
Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of Ms. Brooks' revelations about quite how cosy and close the relationship was between News International and Tony Blair, and Murdoch's secret backdoor meetings at Number 10 under both the last and present governments, does the Prime Minister agree that this explains why successive governments have been so reluctant to act in response to the 2003 Culture, Media and Sport Committee recommendations, the 2006 Information Commissioner report, and calls last year from Lib Dem MPs for a judicial inquiry into phone hacking?
People shouldn't shout the Honourable Lady down, because she's making a very fair point. And frankly, it's a point that doesn't reflect very well on either Conservative or Labour, which is there were a lot of warnings about what was going wrong. Warnings from the Information Commissioner, warnings from the Select Committee, but we didn't put high enough up the agenda the issue of regulating the media. Now, we shouldn't be pointing fingers about this. We should be recognising that we need to work on this to get it right, to respond to those reports and actually put some of their proposals into the law.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the member who chairs the Home Affairs Committee, referred earlier to the file that was compiled in 2007, which was sent off to the legal firm Harbottle and Lewis. Now, in that, according to Lord MacDonald, the former DPP, there is absolutely blindingly obvious evidence that police officers were paid for information by the newspaper. News International are still refusing to allow that to be fully considered and are insisting on client confidentiality. So Harbottle and Lewis, who are an important British firm, are unable to put their side of the argument. Isn't this clear evidence that News International, contrary to the pretend humility yesterday, are still refusing to cooperate fully with the investigation?
But the point I would make is that information, if it is germane to the police inquiry, needs to be given to the police and indeed to the Leveson inquiry. What we need to happen now is for the police, and then after the police, this inquiry, to go absolutely in pursuit of the truth. And if people have been paying police officers, those police officers need to be prosecuted, and the people who did the paying need to be prosecuted. It's as simple as that.
James Clapperson.
After hearing the evidence which was given to the Home Affairs Select Committee, can I warmly welcome what my right honourable friend has said today about the attention which will be given to the victims of phone hacking, which includes a wide variety of people, including many members of the public who'd suffered tragedies in their lives. Is he aware that in the evidence of the Home Affairs Select Committee it emerges that it will take a considerable rate of time, at the present rate of progress, for all those victims to be properly informed? Will he do whatever he can to ensure that they are informed as quickly as possible and their cases are now properly investigated?
No, I think my honourable friend makes a good point, and I do understand when you've got the many thousands of people whose phones were hacked, and you've got the current rate of progress of contacting them and looking into this, it could take too long a time to get this done. I know there will be conversations with the police and the Metropolitan Police Authority to make sure adequate resources are put into this investigation. It's already a far bigger investigation than the first failed investigation, but to make sure they get to the bottom of this.
Mr. Nigel Dodds. Speaker, may I welcome the Prime Minister's decision to widen the terms of reference for the Leveson inquiry to include not just the press, but broadcasters and social media as well. But can I be reassured that it will also include other illegal and unethical activities such as so-called blagging, hacking into email accounts, that it will extend to all parts of the United Kingdom, and that in the interest of the victims of crime and terrorism in particular, that both main parties will be absolutely open about the extent of their relationship with the Murdoch Empire?
On the last point about the relationship with News Corporation and Rupert Murdoch and his family, I've been totally transparent and will go on being transparent. On the issue of what the terms of reference mention, of course this inquiry can look at blagging, can look at all of the information crimes that have been documented. One of the issues in the terms of reference was if you mention some forms but not others, you give an additional priority. But no one should be in any doubt. Lord Justice Leveson can go where the evidence leads.
Louise Mensch.
My right honourable friend agree that after the extraordinary events of the last few days, the last thing the general public want to see is cheap partisanship.
I want to hear the Honourable Lady. Louise Mensch.
And that a focus on Andy Coulson comes ill from the party of Tom Baldwin and Damien McBride.
I think the Honourable Lady makes a good point, and can I commend her for questioning and what she did yesterday on the Select Committee, where I think she showed commendable pluck, if I can put it that way, and as well as asking some extremely pertinent questions.
Mr. Dennis Skinner.
In the course of the past few minutes, the Prime Minister has been asked a simple question twice and refused to answer it. As Prime Minister, did he ever discuss the question of the B-Sky bid with news internationals at all the meetings that they attended?
I never had one inappropriate conversation. And let me be clear. I completely took myself out of any decision-making about this bid. I had no role in it. I had no role in when the announcements were going to be made. That is the point. And when the honourable gentleman makes signals like that, I have to say...
Order. The House, again, needs to calm down. Order. The question was properly heard. The Prime Minister's answer must be properly heard. The Prime Minister.
I've answered the question. And the point I would make is, unlike the party he's been supporting for the last God knows how many years, this party set out all its contacts, all its meetings, everything it did, in stark contrast to the party opposite.
Mr. Tobias Elwood.
Mr. Speaker, judging the mood of the chamber, this might be an unpopular thing to say, but outside the Westminster bubble, I'm getting the impression that the nation has had its fill on its subject. It's actually getting fed up. It wants answers about the police corruption. It wants answers about the hacking. It wants answers about the relationship between the press and the media. But there's an inquiry underway, and that's where the answers will actually come. And I think it's time that this Westminster bubble frenzy is actually placed on hold. There are other pressing matters, Mr. Speaker, that this nation expects us
We
to
are
focus on.
grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. Prime Minister.
Honourable friend makes a good point, which is we have set up the fullest possible inquiry, an inquiry that was never held under the 13 years of the last government. We've now got to let that inquiry find the answers to all of these questions. It looks at the police, it looks at media, it looks at B-Sky B, it looks at the conduct of politicians. It is able to ask all of those questions, and we should allow it to get on with the job.
Paul Farrelly.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, Prime Minister, News International's defence seems to have shifted from one rogue reporter to one, possibly more, rogue lawyers. They still haven't fully revealed who knew what and when, and who participated in the cover-up. Rupert Murdoch said yesterday to the Select Committee that that situation was unsatisfactory. Prime Minister, what would you urge News International to do now to resolve that situation?
Very simple. Tell the truth to the police and to the inquiry.
Nicola Blackwood.
Mr. Speaker. Does the
Prime Minister agree with me that having failed the victims in 2006, when the Met and the government ignored the ICO's warnings, and having failed the victims in 2009, when the Met's 8-hour review dismissed evidence in their own possession, we should not fail them now by simply apportioning blame. What we need is real reform of our police, our media and our politics.
I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right, and the fact is we can go back over these reports and back over the missed warnings. The inquiry will be able to do that too, and we should use that information to use this, frankly, once-in-a-generation chance to try and get media regulation right.
David Winnick. This motion is about public confidence, at least the debate which is going to take place. Can I ask the Prime Minister this question? Does he really feel that his conduct, first as leader of the opposition, then as Prime Minister, should inspire confidence in bearing in mind the phone hacking allegations and the way in which he employed the former editor of a News of the World? Doesn't he realise that to many people, how he has acted in the last few years has been pretty sordid?
My answer to the honourable gentleman is yes, because which government has set up a judicial inquiry? This one. Which government has made sure there's a fully resourced and staffed up police investigation? This one. Which government is being totally transparent about its conduct and contacts with the media and asking others to do the same? That is what this government has done. His government, for 13 years, had all these opportunities and failed to take them.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Speaker, would the Prime Minister agree that in the past, when the House of Commons has been faced with big issues, it's had a tendency for knee-jerk overreactions? And would he agree that actually newspapers are a force for good in this country, and that actually what we want at the end of this process is criminality weeded out of the media, but nothing that impinges on a free press, free speech and holding people in authority to account?
I think my honourable friend is entirely right about this, and we have to make sure, as a House of Commons, as a government, as an opposition, in the debate that we have about this, to show an element of restraint in the regulation of the media, because there is always a danger that the pendulum swings too far the other way and we start to threaten investigative journalism, a strong and independent media, one that can call government to account. And when we consider some of the scandals that have been uncovered in recent years, it's often been the press that have done it and not the regulators. We'll come on to this, I'm sure, in the debate we're going to have later, but it's absolutely vital we maintain that British tradition.
David Lammy.
Rebecca Brooks yesterday described the Prime Minister as a friend and a neighbour. We heard from Jeremy Clarkson about Christmas walks and conversations over sausages. Given...
Order. This is the Mother of Parliaments, where we have free speech. This question will be heard, and that's the end of it. Mr. David Lammy.
Given the Butler review in the last Parliament, does the Prime Minister believe that such informality on his behalf was consistent with what is expected?
Well, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is one of the things that came out of the evidence yesterday is that whereas Rebecca Brooks was invited 6 times a year to number 10 Downing Street under both the former Prime Ministers, she hasn't been invited to number 10 Downing Street by me. Now, of course, I have set out the great contrast. The great contrast is I have set out all of the contacts and meetings that I've had in complete contrast to the party opposite. And I can say this to the honourable gentleman, I've never held a slumber party or seen her in her pyjamas.
Mr. Brian Binley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The confidence of my constituents in Northampton in the political...
Order. I want to hear, and the House wants to hear, Mr. Brian Binley.
Speaker, I will start again. The confidence of my constituents in Northampton in the political process has been progressively undermined and can be traced to the dismal example of politicians in the mid-1990s laying all before the altar of media barons. How can we change that culture, address the abysmal failure of political oversight and leadership, and ensure that never again will we allow propriety to be sacrificed whilst those responsible are asleep on watch.
Well, I think the short answer to the honourable gentleman is I think transparency is probably the best answer. I'll come on to this in my speech when we open the debate, but I think the best way of making sure relationships are appropriate and we don't duck issues of media regulation is for everyone to see how often we meet.
Mr. Nick Rainsford.
The Prime Minister has repeatedly emphasised that he has no evidence of any complaint or questions about the conduct of Andy Coulson while he was heading the government media service. Will the Prime Minister confirm that a year ago, during the period when Mr Coulson was Director of Communications, the Cabinet Secretary was alerted to evidence of illegal phone hacking, covert surveillance and hostile media briefing directed against a senior official in the government service? What action, if any, was taken to investigate what appears to have been disgraceful and illegal conduct close to the heart of government?
Well, I have to look very closely at what the honourable gentleman says, but the point I've made, and I've never seen any evidence to go against it, is that in the period that Andy Coulson worked at number 10 Downing Street as head of communications, that there was no complaint about the way he did his job. Now, I fully accept, I take responsibility for employing him. I take responsibility for that decision. And I've laid out very clearly today what I think of that now and all that has been learnt, and you have to learn these lessons if you're going to go on and get things right for the future. I would say, in my defence, is the time he spent in Downing Street, he did not behave in a way that anyone felt was inappropriate. And that is important, because the decision was to employ him. The decision was then his to leave. And during that period, people cannot point to misconduct and say that, therefore, was a misjudgment.
Karen Bradley.
Many constituents have contacted me regarding this important issue, and they will join me in welcoming the statement today. But many others have been in touch concerning other important issues, such as the crisis in the Eurozone and the situation in the Horn of Africa. Can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that this government is dealing with all issues and not simply focusing on phone hacking?
The Honourable Lady is right. People do want us to get on with the other issues, particularly at a time where we need the economy to grow, we need to provide more jobs, we've got to get to grips with problems of the cost of living. They want to see reforms in welfare and immigration. Yes, they want us to deal with this issue, but they want us to keep a perspective and a balance and get on with many of the issues this country needs to deal with.
Mr. Pete.
Well, a flavour of that Commons debate with MPs questioning David Cameron. It continues all afternoon in the Commons, and you can watch gavel-to-gavel coverage on BBC Parliament. But before we go, let's discuss that debate and where this episode leaves British politics with Kevin Maguire of The Mirror and Tim Montgomery of Conservative Home. Welcome to both of you. First of all, Tim Montgomery, what about David Cameron's performance? It was a big day. We'd already had the theatre yesterday. A lot of pressure on him, cutting short his trip to South Africa. How did he do?
I think he did very well, and I say that for someone who thinks he's been a little bit behind the curve for the last couple of weeks. I think he was very authoritative today, and I think he's where the British people want their Prime Minister to be. He's taken incredibly tough action to deal with problems that all occurred during the Labour years, and I think the British people now, they've seen the Prime Minister take action, and they want the government to get focused on the issues that they are concerned about, like the euro, like immigration, like crime. And I think enough has been done now for him to have earned the right to move on.
Has he done enough, though, to persuade his own backbenchers? Because they will probably have sat there and seen Ed Miliband, the Labour leader, having had a pretty good time of it through the phone hacking scandal, and, to use your words, perhaps viewing their own Prime Minister as being slightly behind the curve. Has he convinced them?
Well, they were certainly roaring sort of their support today. They were very enthusiastic. And I think maybe we're beginning to see the signs of a little bit of overreach from Ed Miliband. I readily concede he's had a good couple of weeks, but there was an element today in which I think he was seeing conspiracy theories almost behind every corner. He's done well. He now needs to address what is his fundamental weakness as a Labour leader, is that people don't trust him on the economy. And when we're going into a summer when the economy is going to be absolutely dominant, he needs to change gear and change focus.
Do you think then that he did, Kevin, hit the wrong note today, Ed Miliband, that actually, having had these few weeks where he has put pressure on David Cameron, today was a day perhaps to come together and say we all have to look at relationships with the press, relationships with the police, rather than continuing on this line of why did you hire Andy Coulson?
Yeah, today was very party political on both sides, and it was more
real pantomime. I think there was a lot more heat than light, and I thought David Cameron did do well. It was very feisty, although I'm sure some of his answers on what he did or didn't know about Andy Coulson, also B-Sky B, probably wouldn't stand up to sustained questioning if he came and sat here.
Let's take
the
B-Sky B question. He was asked several times, but above all by the beast of Bolsover, who finally actually got a straightforward question. In all the meetings with News International, has he ever raised the issue of B-Sky B? Now, his first answer to that was, as Rebecca Brooks said yesterday, his second was, I've never had an inappropriate discussion. I'm afraid most people will think, well, he did then. Not inappropriate, but he did discuss B-Sky B at some stage.
He did, and he's not being straight, he's not being clear, presumably because it's embarrassing.
Otherwise, you would say no, or yes.
And was it around a dinner table? Was it on a point-to-point?
It's the meetings question, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see, the meetings, he's been very transparent, he says, about publishing the meetings, official meetings between members of News International and the government, but not about those informal social interactions.
Well, that's right. It's always been the case in Downing Street. You go downstairs, it's recorded, you go upstairs for a private meeting, it never was. But he's had so much social contact, as Gordon Brown and Tony Blair did. Let's not forget.
Well, and Gordon Brown particularly. I mean, and much has been made of that, even by Rupert Murdoch himself yesterday, about how cosy they were, the Browns, with the Murdochs.
Oh, a very good line from David Cameron. Look, I've never seen Rebecca Brooks in her pyjamas after Sarah Brown had that slumber party at
By the way,
Checkers.
I haven't either. Have you?
No.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Full disclosure here.
Perhaps we should ask everybody around the table.
No one would admit it now, anyway.
No, exactly.
I've never seen her dressed inappropriately. Correct answer.
And from that, I mean, in terms of inappropriate relationships, I mean, where it comes to Labour's relationship with the Murdochs, not just Gordon Brown but Tony Blair, do you think they themselves are putting themselves up in the firing line if they continue in that vein?
Yeah, they are in part. You can't ignore the past, the history, and Labour was too close. Tony Blair and Alistair Campbell ran their media operation through News International. Gordon Brown was terrified, tried to cosy up unsuccessfully as it turned out.
In the end, successful for a while.
Oh, that's absolutely true. But in the end, he got his fingers burned. But of course, Ed Miliband's got quite clean hands on this.
Well, I think some of us would dispute that.
Yes,
Kevin,
why do you dispute that?
Well,
the appointment of Tom Baldwin, or
absolutely. Andy Coulson was there at the Prime Minister's side for a while, but he's been gone now for a few months. Still there today at Ed Miliband's side is this guy called Tom Baldwin. He used to work at the Times, used to work at News International.
Of wrongdoing,
very direct. Well, that was exactly, of course, the same position for Andy Coulson for a while.
Tom Baldwin was never at the heart.
Very specific allegations have been made by Lord Ashcroft and others about him blagging into bank accounts. So
he hasn't had quite got the killer facts have yet to come out on that.
To come out.
Where are they?
And maybe they may yet come out.
Well, you're close to Lord Ashcroft. When are we going to get them?
But for Andrew,
he hasn't spoken to me since that 5 o'clock interview on election night.
Surprise,
man! That's right.
But for someone who is trying to ride, his high horse, as Ed Miliband is doing, and saying that he is kind of whiter than white, and actually to have this guy with some significant question marks hanging over his head is dangerous. As well, of course, as what Rupert Murdoch revealed to us yesterday, the scale of the meetings that have been taking place between Labour leaders of the past and Labour and Murdoch Empire.
The political benefits for Ed Miliband and the Labour Party. I mean, first of all, there are polls that said actually how engaged are is the public generally in this when you have got these other issues. But also, the Labour Party polling hasn't improved that much. Ed Miliband's standing has improved, and he'll be pleased about that, won't he?
Well, he should be. He was a very low base
before. Exactly.
He's actually made himself safe within the Labour Party. That's the first. That's the first thing he's done, because Murdoch's the big bogeyman for most people in the Labour Party. But no, he hasn't broken through yet with the country as a whole. But it's a slow burner. Now, it may never explode fully. It may never detonate. There may not be the dynamite fact to basically nail David Cameron to Andy Coulson knowing things he shouldn't have known and shouldn't have taken him on, because that may not exist. But if it does, then I think Ed Miliband will look very different publicly.
Well, in terms of the standing then of David Cameron, I mean, over the last few days, we had a bit of a debate about this earlier in the programme, in terms of where have the senior Tories been batting for David Cameron. Now, I was told, actually, by people within the Conservative Party, look, we didn't know what the line was. Difficult to come out and bat if we don't actually know what we're supposed to be saying. What do you say to that?
Well, I think David Cameron will be OK after this. He's had a good performance today, and the overall approval ratings haven't changed. But I think there are lessons to be learned. You know, traditionally, you would have a Tory party chairman out there in the media every day batting for the Prime Minister. Well, I rang about Central Office about this the other day. I wondered whether she was unwell. I wondered whether she was abroad, and apparently she's preparing for party conference, which is 3 months away. You know,
she's not spoken to me since the Tory party conference.
Well, I remember that.
A lot of enemies here.
A car crash interview. Maybe I shouldn't want the party chairman in the media, but Cameron desperately needs that kind of figure out there doing the stuff that he needs to be slightly above. He needs a Rottweiler who particularly will go for some of the hypocrisies and contradictions in Labour's position.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Yes. And indeed, that's it for today. We thank all of our guests. Indeed, that really is it for the summer.
Are you sure?
After 2 false starts. We will not be back tomorrow unless you know something different.
But we will be back on the 5th of September, so do join us then. Enjoy your summer, of course, from all of us here. Bye-bye.
Happy summer.
A new dragon has entered the den. Dragon's Den, coming soon to BBC Two.
Will Britain's athletes have the last word? The World Trials and UK Championships, Saturday 30th of July at 6 on BBC Two.
So I come out to a cheering audience, and no, wait, bigger than this. There we go. Then the guests, I got him, her, and Bruce Forsyth. I go all Brucey on him, show him how it's done. And then Ronnie's saying, come on, Rob, let's do a number. We look great doing that. The crowd's going wild. Matt Lucas wants to join in. I say, wait your turn, Matt Lucas. But he joins in anyway. Then I've got a top hat. Then there's a big thing over there. There's fireworks, and when I'm really tired, we'll just roll the credits.
The Rob Brydon Show. It's like a chat show, but done by Rob Brydon. Starts Friday at 10 on BBC Two.
BBC Two's schedule gets back on track with To Buy or Not To Buy from the Black Country at 1:45. So, in the meantime now, an extra mystery, the man of the moment, Dr. Sloan.